The cold, metallic click of the door echoed through the darkened hallway. Jonathan Shale, or rather, James Smith, stood still, his body tense, every muscle screaming for action. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed to amplify the pounding of his heart. The school library was eerily quiet. The only sounds the distant thrum of a school bell, and the soft shuffle of his boots on the polished floor. He could feel them coming. Juan Lucas and his gang of thugs were just around the corner, armed and ready to eliminate him. The trap had been set. He had seen their movements on the hidden cameras he'd installed in the school. But this time, he wasn't just going to wait for the attack. He was going to fight back. This was no longer just about protecting Jane. This was about bringing the whole corrupt system down. The door swung open. A figure emerged from the shadows, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the room. Jonathan's hand gripped the handle of his knife, a cold, quiet resolve settling over him. It's now or never. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories. The roots darkness of Miami's high school felt suffocating as the evening settled in. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights above cast a cold, sterile glow across the empty hallway. Jonathan Shale, or more accurately James Smith, stood motionless by the door, gripping his textbook tightly, eyes scanning the shadowed corners of the hallway. Tonight, he wasn't just a teacher starting a new job. He was a man haunted by his past, a former soldier turned into a substitute teacher. Beneath the plain, unassuming shirt of James Smith lay a man who had seen war, bloodshed, and death. His team had been discharged after a failed mission, a mission that had been classified and hidden from the public. But it wasn't just the failure that drove Shale away from the military. It was the loss, the constant cycle of killing, and the toll it took on his soul. Returning to Miami wasn't meant to be a return to war. Yet here he was. The mission had changed. Jane Hetzkow, his girlfriend, a dedicated high school teacher, was in danger. She had been targeted by the Kings of Destruction KOD, a violent student gang that controlled the school. They had attacked her, leaving her battered and broken. Jane had always fought to protect her students, but she was powerless against the terror these students unleashed. That's when Shale knew his past had caught up to him, and he couldn't sit by any longer. Under the alias James Smith, Shale was here to infiltrate the system, to destroy the corruption, and to protect Jane. The new identity was just that, an identity. No one knew who he really was. No one knew he had been trained for the most dangerous operations the world had ever known. He wasn't just another teacher. He was a soldier in a battlefield, a place where the stakes were high and lives were in danger. The first day in class was chaotic. Shale walked into Jane's classroom, and the atmosphere was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Students tossed paper airplanes, shouted across the room, and ignored every attempt at authority. The Kings of Destruction were everywhere, like shadows, bullying and intimidating their peers. Jane's attempts to maintain order had been futile, but Shale wasn't like other teachers. He wasn't here to just teach. He was here to take control. Within minutes, he gained the upper hand. Rodriguez, one of the KOD members, attempted to threaten him with a knife. With swift precision, Shale disarmed him, rendering the classroom silent. His method wasn't about punishment. It was about making a statement. He would not be intimidated. He was not just a teacher. He was a force to be reckoned with. The students, particularly Tay, who had been defiant, began to quiet down. Shale had their attention, but more importantly, he had their respect. The battlefield was set. He wasn't here to teach math or history. He was here to fight a different kind of war. As the days went on, Shale observed more than just the chaos in the classrooms. He began noticing the deeper issues at play. The school wasn't just being run by the KOD gang, it was being protected by the very people who were supposed to keep the students safe. Shale couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at work. There was a connection between the gang and the school's leadership. Principal Claude Roll was part of it. The way he ignored the violence, the way he had a lavish lifestyle despite being an educator, it all pointed to something much bigger. Shale's suspicion grew as he quietly observed Roll. The principal's cold indifference to the violence, his expensive watch, and the whispers of money flowing through the school, all of it started to fit together. There was no doubt in Shale's mind. Roll wasn't just incompetent, he was complicit. And this wasn't just about protecting Jane anymore. This was about bringing down an entire system of corruption. In the days that followed, Shale quietly planted surveillance devices around the school, hidden cameras, microphones, tools he once used to gather intel for covert operations. Now, these tools would be used to expose the rot within the walls of this school. As Shale collected information, he began to piece together a network of lies and criminal activity. But the more he uncovered, the more dangerous things became. The KOD gang wasn't just an isolated group of troubled teens. They were a well-oiled machine, feeding off the corruption at the school, and they were growing bolder. But there were other dangers. Shale started receiving strange glances from the staff, and whispers followed him down the halls. Was he being watched? Was someone onto him? There was more at stake now, and the question of how deep the corruption ran loomed larger with every passing day. The tension grew. With each new discovery, the pressure mounted, and Shale knew that the moment of reckoning was approaching. But he hadn't expected what would come next. It wasn't just the KOD gang he had to worry about. It was them, the people who were supposed to be protecting the students, the very ones who had been feeding the violence all along. As Shale continued to collect his evidence, the school grew darker. More threats, more whispers, more violence, and the question lingered: how much longer could he remain undercover before everything came crashing down? At the end of this chapter, Shale was on the verge of revealing the truth, but it wasn't just about the gang anymore. It was about a system so deeply corrupt that it was nearly impossible to dismantle, and the real enemy was closer than he ever imagined. Escalation tension in Miami's high school was palpable. Each day that Jonathan Shale, under the alias James Smith, walked through the halls, the sense of impending danger grew thicker. The students, who had once been indifferent to him, now watched his every move, as if sensing that something was off. And Shale, always alert, could feel their eyes on him. He wasn't just teaching anymore, he was living in a war zone, trying to outsmart the enemy from within. The kings of destruction, KOD gang, though still under the radar, was now moving more openly. They no longer hid in the shadows of the school's social structure. They were the structure, the intimidation, the bullying, the drug deals. Everything was happening in plain sight. But the school's leadership, Principal Claude Roll, in particular, was doing nothing about it. Shale had hoped that perhaps Roll's lack of action was due to incompetence, but as time went on, it became clear that Roll's indifference was deliberate. He wasn't just overlooking the gang's activities, he was enabling them. The walls of the school seemed to close in on Shale. One afternoon, as he left the teacher's lounge, he overheard a conversation between two of the school's faculty members. It was hushed, but Shale's sharp ears picked up the crucial bits. "We can't let this go on much longer. The principal's to deepen it. The KOD controls everything." His pulse quickened. This wasn't just about a gang anymore. It was about the entire system being corrupted. It wasn't just about saving Jane. It was about stopping the machine that had poisoned the school. He couldn't do this alone. He had to trust someone inside the school, someone who wasn't blinded by fear or complicit in the corruption. Shale's suspicions turned toward Mr. Sherman, the mild-mannered history teacher who had seemed so out of place in this chaos. Sherman had always been kind to him, offering quiet words of encouragement when the students had been especially rowdy. Shale had been cautious at first, unsure if Sherman was simply another part of the problem or if he could be an ally. But after hearing those whispered words in the hallway, he decided to test the waters. The next day, after school, Shale stayed behind, pretending to grade papers as Sherman passed by the classroom. He didn't have to say much, just a small, well-timed glance, and Sherman took the bait. "Smith, you've been here a while now. Seen a lot, haven't you?" Sherman asked quietly, looking over his shoulder to make sure no one was nearby. "I've seen enough," Shale replied, keeping his voice low, his gaze steady. Sherman looked around again, then stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "I know what you're doing, Smith. I've seen the cameras, the way you're watching everything. You're not here just to teach." Shale's heart raced. It was a risk, but it was one he had to take. "You know about Roll, don't you? About what's really going on here?" Sherman hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I've suspected. For a long time. It's all a mess. But it's bigger than you think, Shale. Roll's not just protecting the COD. He's making money off it. The school's a front for laundering drug money. The COD controls everything from the sports department to the Board of Education." The weight of the words hit Shale like a punch to the gut. He had suspected as much, but hearing it from someone inside the system made it real. Principal Claude Roll was deeper in this than he had imagined. And it wasn't just a few corrupt individuals, it was a network of people, all feeding off the misery of the students and the town. Shale knew it was time to step up his game. The time for careful surveillance was over. He needed action. He needed to bring the truth to light. "Sherman," Shale said, his voice cold with determination, "I need your help. We need to expose this. Together, we can make them all pay for what they've done." Sherman glanced nervously over his shoulder again. "I'm in. But you have to be careful. I know a few other teachers who suspect something's off. We've tried to go to the school board, but Roll has too much influence. He'll shut us down. I don't care anymore. It's not about being careful. It's about stopping him before he does more damage," Shale replied, his mind already racing through the steps they would need to take. The two men spent the next few days strategizing, gathering evidence, and preparing to go public. Shale knew that exposing Roll and the KOD gang would be dangerous, but he couldn't stand by any longer. Jane had already suffered at their hands, and now other students were paying the price. The walls of the school were closing in, and Shale could feel the pressure building. He wasn't sure how much time he had left before Roll would catch on to what he was doing, but he couldn't back down now. He had to finish what he had started. Late one night, after everyone had left the school, Shale and Sherman broke into the school's records room. The files they needed were locked away in a cabinet that Roll had probably intended to remain hidden. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for: documents detailing the illegal activities, financial records showing the school's involvement in the drug trade, and communication between Roll and the gang's leaders. But as they gathered the evidence, Shale's heart sank. There was something even more unsettling in those files, something that hadn't been there before. A list of names, teachers, administrators, even some of the students. Roll wasn't just manipulating the school's resources. He had deep connections outside the school. Two connections that could destroy everything before they could finish. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Someone was coming. Shale's instincts kicked in. "We've got to go, now," he whispered urgently. They quickly grabbed the files and slipped out of the room just as the door swung open. Whoever it was couldn't have seen them, but the clock was ticking. Their cover was blown. The school wasn't safe anymore. Shale had to move fast. They had everything they needed, but the real battle was about to begin. And he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about getting rid of KOD. This was about taking down the entire system. The explosion, the adrenaline coursed through Jonathan Shale's veins as he and Sherman made their way through the dark, deserted hallways of the school. The night was their only ally now. The stolen files burned a hole in Shale's bag, heavy with the truth they had uncovered. They had the evidence, solid proof that Principal Claude Roll was not only enabling the KOD gang, but actively involved in laundering money through the school. But even as the weight of their discovery sank in, Shale could feel the walls closing. The school was no longer a place of safety. It had become the front lines of a war that was far bigger than he had anticipated. As they reached the door to the parking lot, Shale's phone buzzed. A message from Tay, one of the students who had been showing signs of wanting to fight back against the gang. "Mr. Smith, they know. They're coming for you. COD's getting ready. Be careful." Shale's stomach churned. He knew things were escalating, but this was no longer just about covert surveillance. The KOD gang, emboldened by Roll's protection, was now targeting him directly. The time to act was now, before they could silence him. "What do we do now?" Sherman asked, his voice filled with dread. "We expose them," Shale said, his voice hardening with resolve. "It's the only way to stop this." The next morning, Shale walked into the classroom with a different air about him. His face was set, his mind focused. No more pretending. The game had changed. He wasn't just a substitute teacher anymore. He was the man who was about to bring the entire system down. The students were already waiting, some whispering, others clearly afraid. The atmosphere in the room was charged, electric with the knowledge that things were about to go down. Tay's warning wasn't just a bluff. Shale could feel the tension in the air. The KOD gang was ready to make their move. He stepped up to the front of the room, facing the students. "Listen up," he began, his voice steady, cutting through the chaos. "You're going to hear a lot of things today, things you won't want to believe, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Every last one of you deserves to know what's been going on in this school." The classroom fell silent. Shale could feel the eyes of every student on him, their fear palpable. He continued, "Principal Roll isn't just a corrupt leader. He's the reason KOD is able to control this school. And I have the proof. I've seen the financial records. I've seen the evidence. This school is a front for illegal activities, money laundering, drug trafficking, all of it. And it's been happening right under our noses." A ripple of shock ran through the class. Some students gasped. Others sat frozen, unable to process what Shale was saying. The truth was too big for them to comprehend all at once. But Shale wasn't done. "There's no more hiding," he said, pulling out the files from his bag. "This is the proof you need to see." He threw the files onto the desk, the papers spilling out, the documents filled with damning evidence. As the students began to grasp the magnitude of what was happening, the door to the classroom suddenly flew open. A group of KOD members barged in, led by none other than Juan Lucas, the gang's ruthless leader. His face was a mask of rage, his eyes filled with menace. "You think you can destroy everything we've built?" Juan sneered, stepping into the room. His goons followed him, all of them armed. Shale's hand instinctively went to the gun he carried in his jacket, but he stayed calm. He wasn't going to shoot, not yet. This wasn't the time. His plan was bigger than that. "I'm not trying to destroy anything, Lucas," Shale said, his voice unwavering. "I'm trying to save these kids. I'm exposing the truth, whether you like it or not." Juan's laugh was cold, full of disbelief. "You're just a teacher, Smith. You're nothing. You think you can take me down? You're playing in the big leagues now." He raised his hand, signaling his goons to move. But before anything could happen, Tay stood up from his seat. His expression was a mix of fear and determination. "Not anymore," Tay said, his voice firm. "We're not afraid of you anymore." With that, Tay lunged forward, knocking one of the KOD members off balance, a fire extinguisher in his hands. The classroom erupted into chaos as the students, previously paralyzed by fear, found their courage. Tay wasn't the only one. Several other students, those who had quietly been pushed into submission, began to fight back. The room turned into a battleground, with students tossing desks, throwing books, and standing up to the KOD gang for the first time in their lives. Shale stepped back, his mind racing. He had never expected the students to take action so quickly, but now, in the chaos of the moment, he realized that the fight wasn't just his anymore. It was theirs. The confrontation reached a boiling point when Juan Lucas pulled out his gun. "You think you can take me down with a bunch of scared kids?" he snarled. But before he could fire, Shale was already on him. In one swift movement, he tackled Juan, knocking the gun from his hand. They struggled on the ground, the fight desperate and wild. But Shale was faster. Stronger years of military training had taught him how to fight with precision. He finally got the upper hand, pinning Juan to the floor. "Game over," Shale hissed, his grip tightening. Just then, the door to the classroom slammed open again, and Principal Roll stepped in, flanked by a couple of security guards. His eyes locked onto the scene, his expression filled with anger and disbelief. "You think you've won," Roll shouted, stepping forward. "You think you can just tear down everything we've built? This is just the beginning, Shale. You're not leaving this school alive." But Shale's eyes never left the principal. "It's already over," he said quietly. "The truth is out." As the chaos subsided and the police arrived to arrest Roll and the KOD members, Shale stood in the middle of the classroom, breathing heavily. The students were still in shock, but they were free. They had fought back, and they had won. But Shale knew this was just the beginning. The battle to reclaim the school wasn't over yet. It would take time, effort, and sacrifice, but the first victory had been achieved. The aftermath sun hung low in the sky the next day, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement outside the school. The chaos of the previous night still lingered in the air-shattered glass, overturned desks, and the remnants of a battle fought in the name of justice. Shale stood by the front doors, watching as the police led Principal Claude Roll and his KOD thugs away in handcuffs. The familiar weight of victory settled in his chest, but it was a hollow feeling. For every victory, there was a loss, and he knew the real work had only just begun. Inside the school, the students, who had once been caught in the grip of fear, were now walking with their heads held high. They had seen their oppressors fall, and with it, their belief in what could be achieved when they stood together was starting to return. But for Shale, the victory felt bittersweet. His purpose had been clear: expose the corruption, protect Jane, and dismantle KOD. But now, standing in the aftermath, he realized how deep the scars ran. Mr. Smith, called from behind him. He had been one of the first to rise against the KOD, standing up not just for himself but for everyone else who had been silenced for so long. "You did it, we did it." Shale turned and smiled at the student, who had once been part of the KOD gang, now a symbol of resistance. "No," Shale said, his voice soft but firm. "You did it. I just gave you the tools." Tay chuckled, though it was filled with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you." Shale looked at the remnants of the destruction-broken windows, the overturned desks in the classrooms, the tattered posters on the walls. This wasn't just a physical battle. It had been a war for the soul of the school, a war that had cost people their lives, including Mr. Sherman, who had helped Shale with the investigation before he was tragically killed during the raid. The sacrifice weighed heavily on Shale's heart, but he knew it hadn't been in vain. The police investigation into the school's corruption had already begun, with the files Shale had gathered serving as undeniable proof of the illegal activities involving Roll and the KOD gang. As the news broke, more students came forward with testimonies, recounting how they had been threatened, manipulated, or even forced into the gang's clutches. It was clear that KOD's grip on the school went far deeper than Shale had initially realized. But the truth was being brought to light, and it was starting to dismantle the network that had controlled the school for so long. Shale met with the school district superintendent later that day. The man, usually a figure of stern authority, now seemed shaken, as if the entire world he had known was crumbling before his eyes. "Mr. Smith," the superintendent said, his voice tight with both exhaustion and admiration, "I don't know how you did it, but you've exposed something no one wanted to see. The school district will need time to recover from this, but we're grateful for your efforts." Shale didn't respond immediately. His mind was still focused on the bigger picture. "The school is only one part of the system," he said. "There are more places like it. This isn't over." The superintendent's face hardened. "We'll handle it. But you've done enough. You've saved these kids." Shale nodded, but in his heart, he knew that no victory, no matter how significant, was ever complete. There were always more battles, more places where corruption had burrowed deep. And as much as he wanted to be done with it, he knew his work here wasn't finished. As Shale walked back to his truck, the weight of everything settled on him. Jane was recovering, but her injuries would take time to heal. He hadn't been able to save her from the physical trauma, but he had given her the opportunity to live in a world where the threat she had faced no longer loomed over her. That was something. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he needed to do, more he could do. The phone in his pocket buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting to see another update from the police or perhaps a message from Tay. Instead, it was an anonymous message, the type that sent a chill down his spine. "We know who you are. You can't hide forever. The war's not over." Shale's grip on the phone tightened. It wasn't over. He had known it wouldn't be. The system he had just dismantled was only a small part of a much larger network of corruption. But for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had made a difference. The students were free. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Sherman's wife. telling him that her husband's funeral was scheduled for the next day. The loss weighed heavily on Shale, but he had no time to mourn. There was still work to be done. As he drove away from the school, the streets of Miami stretched out before him, a city filled with shadows and untold stories. Shale knew he wasn't done yet. His fight wasn't just for Jane or for the school, it was for every student, every teacher, and every person who had ever been caught in the cycle of fear and corruption. Shale wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting to make sure the world knew that true change, no matter how small, started with standing up to the darkness. The unseen truthmer, Sherman had always been the quiet, unassuming history teacher in the corner of the school. He was the kind of man who blended into the background, a fixture in the school's long corridors, seldom noticed by the students who were consumed by their own dramas and struggles. To the casual observer, he was just another educator, trying his best to make a difference in a system that seemed to be failing around him. But to those who paid attention, especially to Shale, Sherman was something more, a man quietly aware of the darkness surrounding the school. Shale had first met Sherman in the faculty lounge a few days after he had started working at the school. The other teachers had dismissed him, treating him as just another temporary figure in the revolving door of substitute teachers. But Sherman had taken an immediate interest in him, not in the usual way. It wasn't because Shale was an ex-soldier or because of his intimidating presence. It was because Sherman, like Shale, had seen the cracks in the system. And in a place like this, cracks were where the rot began. That morning, as Shale paced outside the principal's office, waiting for the next confrontation with Principal Roll, Sherman's voice appeared beside him, soft yet tinged with a sense of urgency. "James," Sherman said, walking up with his glasses perched precariously on the tip of his nose, "I need to talk to you. It's about Roll." Shale didn't need to ask for more. He had suspected for some time that Sherman wasn't just another teacher. There was something in his eyes, a quiet understanding that spoke volumes. "What about him?" Shale asked, his voice low, his instincts sharpening. Sherman hesitated for a moment, looking around to ensure no one could overhear them. "You're right. Roll isn't just incompetent. He's part of it, but it goes deeper than you think. I've been here long enough to see things that most people don't. Roll, he's the one who created this system." Shale's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, created it?" Sherman sighed, his voice filled with frustration. "The KOD didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Roll has been feeding them, turning a blind eye, but also empowering them. He made sure the administration gave them free rein, and he used them to do his dirty work. It wasn't just about protecting them, it was about control." "Control of what?" Shale asked, now fully engaged. He had suspected as much, but Sherman's words confirmed a deeper, darker conspiracy than he could have imagined. "The school, the district, the whole damn system," Sherman continued, his tone becoming more urgent. "You've seen how students are threatened, how the gang runs everything: money, drugs, even the school board. Roll wasn't just turning a blind eye, he was orchestrating the whole damn thing. He used the KOD to enforce his rule, but there's more, much more." Shale felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You're telling me that Roll wasn't just protecting the gang, he's been working with them all along?" Sherman nodded gravely. "Exactly. But the really sick part, it wasn't just the school. He had his hands in everything. The drug money, the bribes, the illegal deals. He was laundering it all through the school's budget, making it look legitimate. It's not just the COD, it's a network, and it goes far beyond the school gates." Shale was silent for a moment, letting the weight of Sherman's words sink in. He had always known there was something off about Roll, but hearing it in such stark terms made the whole operation seem even more monstrous. "And you've known about this all along?" Shale asked, his voice quieter now, tinged with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "I've suspected for years," Sherman admitted, "but no one listened. Everyone was too afraid to speak up. Roll made sure no one dared to cross him. He knew how to play the system, how to manipulate it. And when I tried to go to the school board, they were all in on it, too. I've been gathering what I can for years, but it wasn't enough. Until you came along." Shale's eyes narrowed. "You've been gathering evidence?" "Of course," Sherman replied, his voice growing more passionate. But I couldn't do it alone. Not without the right help. Roll had eyes everywhere. But when I saw how you were watching, how you were willing to stand up against this system, I knew you were the key. That's why I started leaving things for you to find. The cameras, the files, the reports. I knew you could get it done. And you did. Shale's heart thudded in his chest. The files. The hidden cameras. The small clues scattered around the school. It all made sense now. Sherman had been the one to plant them, guiding him without ever directly intervening. He had given Shale the ammunition he needed to bring the truth to light, but at a cost. You knew what this would lead to, didn't you? Shale asked, the question heavy with unspoken understanding. Sherman nodded. I knew Roll wouldn't go down without a fight, and I knew you'd be targeted. But I also knew that if anyone had the guts to take him on, it was you. So I played my part, gave you the pieces to the puzzle. But it's not just about bringing Roll down. It's about bringing down everything he built. The KOD is just a small part of it. The real danger is in the people who allowed him to grow so powerful in the first place. Shale was quiet for a long moment. Sherman's words echoed in his mind, the truth settling into his bones. The battle ahead was far bigger than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about a gang or a corrupt principal. It was about an entire system built on lies, manipulation, and fear. As Sherman left him standing there, his words lingered like smoke in the air. Shale knew what he had to do, but the path ahead was murkier than ever, and somewhere in the depths of the school, hidden in the files and the records, there was more to uncover, more that would change everything. The conclusion, the price of justice. The final chapter of this war had been written in blood, sweat, and shattered lives. Shale had given everything: his time, his safety, and, in many ways, his humanity. He had fought not just for Jane, but for every student who had ever walked through those doors, every teacher who had silently endured the same oppressive system. The victory had been hard won, but the price of that victory was steep. As the dust settled and the school began to recover, Shale stood outside the gates, watching the students slowly return to their normal lives. The KOD gang was no more, and Principal Roll was behind bars, facing the full weight of his crimes. But in the quiet aftermath, Shale knew there was no true rest for someone who had fought this battle. He couldn't ignore the toll it had taken on him, on his heart, on his mind, on his soul. The death of Mr. Sherman weighed heavily on him. Sherman had been a guiding hand, a silent partner in this crusade for justice, and his sacrifice would never be forgotten. The guilt lingered. Had there been another way? Could Shale have done more to protect him? The loss of such a good man, a man who had only ever wanted to do what was right, stung like an open wound that couldn't heal. But even in the midst of grief, there was a glimmer of hope. The students, once broken and afraid, were now speaking out, standing tall. They had found their voices, thanks to the courage of people like Sherman and, yes, even Shale. The school would take time to heal, but the foundation had been laid for something better. The darkness had been driven out, if only for a moment. For Shale, though, the fight wasn't over. There would always be more corrupt systems, more hidden evils waiting to rear their heads. He knew his place in this world now, not as a soldier in someone else's war, but as someone who would stand against the shadows wherever they appeared. Justice had been served, but at a cost, and in the end, Shale knew that true justice wasn't about taking down the bad guys. It was about fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. No matter the personal sacrifice, if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.